What's up, everyone, and welcome to The Gimme. That's right. Our show's got a name now. Why The Gimme? Well, because it's good. You get it? I'm Jason Sobel. Along with me is the great Peter Jennings, as always, here to talk about the Rocket Mortgage Classic. We're less than 12 hours away from the first tee time at Detroit Golf Club. And Peter, are you like me? Are you still trying to work lineups and figure out more bets, or are you you got everything down already?
I still have a lot of betting in front of me, and the betting has actually made my DFS process move later in the night. So DFS will come last, and ecstatic that we have another week of golf and a chance to win $1 million. So really excited for the Rocket Mortgage.
Well, it's probably a good thing that you and I aren't all locked in yet. And it's probably a good thing if you guys listening and watching right now aren't locked in, because we've got some breaking news from the PGA Tour. And I'm going to read this verbatim. Following several asymptomatic positive tests, followed by negative tests, and after direct consultation with the CDC, we are transitioning to the CDC's test-based model with their support. Going forward, in accordance with CDC guidelines, a player or caddy who tests positive for COVID-19 but has not had any symptoms may return to competition if he returns two negative test results a minimum of 24 hours apart. Okay, sounds like, all right, there's a policy change, makes sense. It's all logical. But there's a little catch to it, because it's going to be enacted immediately. This policy change will go into effect this week. Cameron Champ, who tested positive June 23rd and had three subsequent negative tests in the last 72 hours that immediately followed that positive result, has been medically cleared to play in the Rocket Mortgage Classic. He will remain subject to arrival testing once on site in Detroit, but he will be, in addition to the field, assigned a 2:10 p.m. tee time tomorrow, Thursday. How about that, Peter? I'm not sure I've ever seen that. Obviously, we've seen players withdraw and other players get into the field late on Wednesday before the opening round. I've never seen a player just added to a field, but different measures for different times. And I guess let's get right to it. What do you think of Cameron Champ this week? Literally flying in at the last minute to get to play in this event.
I love Cameron Champ this week. I think the PGA Tour has been really thoughtful in their approach, and I hope that this works out, and players continue to play and can stay safe in these events. But specifically on Cameron Champ, I mean, I think this course, with the setup and how we saw the low scores last year, it's going to set up well for guys who can go extremely low, might be a little higher variance, and that is Cameron Champ. Guy's the longest player on the PGA Tour. This is not a very strong field. We've seen him win on the PGA Tour, so I think Cameron Champ is a phenomenal DFS play if they get him in. And from a betting perspective, he certainly moves the market. He's someone that is near the top of this field, in my opinion. I think he's kind of in that mid to top tier, and I'm excited to get some exposure to Cameron Champ.
Yeah, I've been saying for a while that Cameron Champ was sort of the bright, shiny new toy a couple of years ago. This young kid who could hit it a mile, really athletic. And we're saying, hey, this guy's going to be really good for a really long time. And then had a little down period in his rookie year after winning. And all of a sudden, everyone jumped off the bandwagon. It's time to jump back on. I'm not so sure about this week. And again, if they get him into DFS contests, man, he's going to be very low owned, because I think a lot of people have finished off their lineups and gone to have dinner with the family and gone to bed. So you might be able to get him low owned if indeed they do add him late. But even if they don't, maybe this week, but certainly moving forward for Cameron Champ. That said, Peter, getting to the top of the list, you mentioned Cameron Champ is the longest hitter out there on the PGA Tour. I know a guy who might take offense to that. It's a guy who eats 5 eggs and 5 pieces of bacon and 2 protein shakes. I'm guessing he might throw an English muffin in there or something too, maybe a little fruit. Fruit would be nice for the digestive system, I think, Bryson. But Bryson DeChambeau at right around 6-1 this week. Can you bring yourself, as much as Bryson seems like a lock as far as a top play on this slate, can you bring yourself to bet a guy who's 6-1 in the field? This is almost Tiger in his prime type odds this week for Bryson.
It's crazy odds. It's certainly a weak field, and that price gets a little worse too with Cameron Champ in the field. It's not like Cameron Champ's moving it like a John Rahm or Rory or someone like that would, but definitely hurts that 6 or 6.5-1 number. And as much as Bryson's put on weight, and it's incredible the way he's slinging the club, I'll still take Cameron Champ hitting the ball farther than him. But those are the top 2 guys out there, in my opinion. So yeah, in terms of betting, I would look to take Bryson in matchups more than the outrights and top 5, top 10 markets. I think there's just a little too much juice there. And, a true price for me is going to come in much closer to like 8 or 9 to 1 versus the 6 to 1. So I'm fading him from a straight betting perspective, but I do think there's potentially some value in matchups, and in DFS, very hard to ignore a huge favorite like that. The betting difference is much wider than the price difference on DraftKings. So Bryson in DFS makes sense, but I am not touching that 6.5 to 1 number.
We'll get to some more DFS later, and I know you like Bryson. It's hard not to like him in this field, even as highly priced as he is. If you want to get some value on Bryson, I like him against the featured group that he's with tomorrow in that 3-ball. So might want to look at Bryson just against those guys. He's gone 65, 67, 65 in his last 3 opening rounds since the PGA Tour has returned. Sticking with the top tier, let's go to a couple other favorites. Tyrrell Hatton, Sungjae Im, Patrick Reed, Webb Simpson, all near the top of that list, all guys that I've heard people on already this week. I think what we have to remember, though, is that last year's winner of the Rocket Mortgage Classic was Nate Lashley out of nowhere, the last guy to get into the field. The top 4 on the leaderboard were ranked an average of 397th in the world. So if you want to go with one of these top guys, you've got to remember you don't have history on your side. That was the inaugural event, so we don't have a whole lot to go on, but that was the first one last year, and really no big names near the top. Are you looking at anybody who's any less than 40 to 1, 50 to 1 this week?
Really, I think I have some clear fades. Probably not going to have much exposure to Webb Simpson this week. I know he's coming off a win, but a week off, and he's getting so much credit for that win. I'll fade the recency bias there. Of course, think he's an incredible golfer, but the way he's priced, I much prefer Patrick Reed, Hideki Matsuyama, Sungjae Im versus Webb Simpson. And Tyrrell Hatton, someone historically I've really been on. I'm not sure this is my favorite type of course for him. I think he's better suited when he's hitting a lot of 7 and 8 irons. But yeah, that top range, I mean, it's not the top range that we've had, the previous 3 weeks, but certainly some guys you're going to have to take in DFS. But from a betting perspective, I feel very comfortable fading all of those guys.
Yeah, Hatton's a fade for me this week. I hate to do it. I just think he's overvalued. He's been 6th and then 1st and then 3rd in his 3 starts since having right wrist surgery late last year. He took 3 months off and then came back with a 6th place finish, as I mentioned, in Mexico at the WGC event there after winning the Arnold Palmer. Then, of course, another 3-month break. So hasn't been a whole lot of golf for Tyrrell Hatton, even though we're looking at him saying he's played great. He hasn't played all that much. Of that top tier, the guys that I do like, Sungjae Im, and we really didn't mention Victor Hovland. I think Victor Hovland is a very strong play this week. If he could have putted just a little bit better at the Travelers Championship last week, he could have been right there in the mix come Sunday afternoon. But still, I think a really strong play. Played well there last year, just his, I believe, 2nd professional event last year when he was made the cut. And like I said, played pretty well. Let's get to the mid-tier. And the mid-tier is very interesting this week. Is this a sweet spot? We've seen a lot of guys so far this year in that 40 to 1, 50 to 1, 60 to 1 range who have won tournaments. Is this a sweet spot this week to pick a winner?
I'm actually going to say no, it's not the sweet spot. I think there's a lot of compelling guys, and I've heard that argument that this is the sweet spot. For me, we'll get to it in a second, but I want to take a bunch of long shots. I think that there's a ton of value on some of these longer shot guys, and I'd rather build a portfolio of 20 to 30 long shots than load up on a favorite and a couple of the mid-tier guys. There are some players I like in this range, but from a betting perspective, if you're looking at outright and top 5 markets, for me this week, I am looking at a lot of the real long shots. So I don't think it's a sweet spot. It sounds like you might, though.
I've got 3 guys I really like. I want to run each name by you. The first one, Brandt Snedeker, has won on 3 different Donald Ross courses in his career. He's been top 10 on 3 other Donald Ross courses. That's more than a pattern. That's a trend right there, Peter. It feels like even though he hasn't played great lately, he gets on a Donald Ross course and things just click for him. What do you think of Brandt Snedeker?
So the bull case for Brandt Snedeker is he's an incredible putter. And I think we're going to see really low scoring again. Where it's looking like benign weather. We saw just really low scores last year, and I would be shocked if we didn't see great scoring again. So when you take Snedeker, you're confident. If he's getting on the greens, he can make a bunch of birdies because he's one of the best putters in the world. And I really think it makes a lot of sense for him to have a great tournament here, and he could definitely rocket up the leaderboard. The bear case for me on Snedeker is a lot of people are on him, and the market is giving him a ton of respect relative to some other names. So I do like him, but the market has gotten really, really heavy on him. And I think the Donald Ross is value, or at least his.
Peter, I think we lost you for a minute there. I lost you at least. I'm not sure if that was my hit or yours, but I'll throw another name at you if you're back now. Erik van Rooyen. I know a lot of people look at him and say, well, he doesn't have that much experience playing in the U.S. He's a South African guy. He plays primarily on the European Tour. He's come to the U.S. now. Oh, by the way, he happened to play his college golf at a place called Minnesota, which happens to be in the Midwest. I think he'd probably be familiar with this type of turf and this type of golf course. He's played well so far this year. Anything for EVR?
I love EVR this week. I think that's a really great call. Love the Minnesota angle. And I just think EVR is an underrated golfer. We saw some really good play out of him pre-quarantine and the break. And he's a super talented guy. He's competed against some of the best players in the world. And I like the market price on him. I prefer EVR in a big way to Snedeker. And a lot of markets, Snedeker is priced as a bigger favorite. So EVR, I think there's absolutely value on.
I'm all on the initials this week. My last guy in this range, going from EVR to RCB, Rafa Cabrera Bello. He's been playing well. This guy tends to play his best golf on the weekend, sort of a little Victor Hovland thing he's got going on where he can post a 64, 65 on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, which you've got to like when you're betting on him. Any love for RCB this week?
Yeah, I think RCB is an interesting one. Another guy who is getting a lot of love in the DFS industry and in the betting communities. I'm lukewarm on him. I understand the reason to be bullish. I'm a little bearish relative to the market, so I probably won't have much exposure, but I certainly think he's interesting. My favorite guy in this range is Harold Varner III, who's played amazing golf on Thursdays and Fridays so far in 2020. And, this course, I think the key is going to be finding fairways initially, which, you can say that for every week, but specifically this week, I think driving the ball well and then making putts. So Varner is one of the most underrated drivers of the golf ball. And, he's competed and been right up there with these star-studded fields. Now it's a much weaker field. And I think Varner has some pretty nice value in that mid-tier.
Two names in this tier that I have heard a lot of people on. They definitely scare me because I'm really not on them much at all this week, especially in the betting market. But I've heard a lot of Kevin Na. I've heard a lot of Adam Hadwin. Should I be scared if I don't have either of those guys this week?
I like Adam Hadwin a lot. And Kevin Na obviously played really well down the stretch last week, made the putt on 18 to sneak into the top 5. And if you're going to talk about good putters, Kevin Na is on the short list of best putters on the PGA Tour, best putters on the planet. So I get that angle, but man, the market has really moved in his favor, and he's some pretty short odds across the board. So I prefer Adam Hadwin from a betting perspective, but both are really interesting in DFS. And in DFS, it's harder to just take a bunch of scrubs. So, or scrubs is the wrong word, but the lower tier guys, you're not going to be able to load up on them. So I think Kevin Na and Adam Hadwin are certainly guys I'm looking more at in DFS than I am in the betting markets.
Pete, we've got tour players watching this show right now. We can't call them scrubs. Give me a break.
I know, especially when I'm a 10 handicap. So who am I to say? These guys are all incredible.
Your 10's going to take money off my 5 every day of the week. Let's get to this lower tier. And as I mentioned, Nate Lashley, last year's winner, was ranked outside the top 300 in the world when he won. We had Doc Redman. He was ranked 711, open 24 hours, but he came in second last year. A lot of people like Doc Redman, by the way, this week. He's a little bit lower priced this week than he was last year. And we had Wes Roach tying for third. So point is, the lower tier players really came through last year, at least some of them on that leaderboard. Who are some guys that you're looking at? I have a few names that I really like this week, and some of them I have a feeling are going to overlap, Pete.
Oh, yeah. No, this is the tier that I absolutely love. I'll start with one guy who's getting some recognition and maybe flying on more people's radar now, and that's Will Gordon. coming off an incredible finish last week. Young kid, 23, had a lot of collegiate success, hits the ball a ton. On TrackMan, we're seeing mid 180s ball speed on these PGA Tour events. And now I think this is a big thing from a subjective angle. He has the PGA Tour status after, that top 3 finish last week. So he's not stressing out saying, I have to, win or go out there to keep my card. He has this time. So we oftentimes see that really helps people feel comfortable, kind of let loose. And this week, I think it's going to be all about making birdies. So I think Will Gordon is an up-and-coming stud that you might want to – I don't know if it's buying low, but I think he's going to get more and more expensive as the year goes on.
I will say this much about Will Gordon. I have him for top 20 this week. I have him for first-round leader. I just think the pressure of trying to get that special temporary membership is off his shoulders. He can play fast and loose with really not a care in the world because he's playing with house money right now. I like him to put up a low score on Thursday. I also would just advise maybe don't expect Will Gordon to put up another third-place finish, but this kid is good. I mean, he's played 8 PGA Tour events now, finished 31st or better in 5 of them. Going a little bit lower, a guy that you and I talked about on the Action Network podcast earlier this week, we both watched him playing alongside Jason Day on the PGA Tour live coverage Sunday morning, streaming online. Kevin Chappell, to me, just looks like the Kevin Chappell of old. He's wearing a UCLA Bruins hat. He's got a stand bag that his caddy is carrying. I mean, it just looks like he's kind of like old school Ryan Moore, sort of, I don't really care what I'm supposed to do. Me against the world. Let's go. I'm just going to do the thing I do at home all the time, and it's going to work for me. I love that attitude. Any love for Kevin Chappell this week?
Yeah, I love Kevin Chappell. And, our friend Drew Stoltz shares a locker right next to him at Whisper Rock. And I've heard he's shot some ridiculously low numbers there, and it makes sense why. I mean, watching him on the stream, he hits such a great ball off the tee, very long, tight ball flight. And then when he gets in close to those wedges, I mean, he is dangerous. The putter has held him back at times, but if he gets hot with the putter, I mean, he could make a lot of noise this week. And I think, again, I expect to see minus 20 or more as the winners. So you're going to need to make a lot of birdies, and Chappell has the distance and the firepower to do that. And he's not getting enough recognition. He's fought some injuries in the past, so I don't think many people are considering him. And he's the exact type of golfer I want to be betting. I want a lot of these long shots and hope that one of them pops. And, you can take a shot on, 20 outrights if you're betting, all guys that are 150 to 1 or more. So I really like this range, and Kevin Chappell is one of the guys I like.
I'm going to get to some more lower tier guys, but you mentioned something right there. I saw a prop bet this week of the winning score over under 267.5. Par for the 4 days is 288. So basically you're looking at something better than 20 under. You're looking at 21 under or better. Last year, it was Nate Lashley, who was 25 under. Seems really good, really low. But remember, he won by 6. Doc Redman was only 19 under, finishing in second place. I kind of like the under on that. Reportedly, they've toughened up Detroit Golf Club this week, pinched the fairways a little bit. The rough is a little bit longer. Usually in the first year that a golf course is in the rotation on the PGA Tour, they make it a little easier. They don't want to set it up too hard and scare the guys off for subsequent years. So I expect it to play harder this year. I sort of like the under on that, or actually the over on the scoring total, over 267.5, something in the 20 under or less when you're looking at the leaderboard that way. You're saying over 20 under, huh? You think it's still going to be that low scoring?
I think it's going to be very low scoring. I think the line is very efficient, actually, right there. They have raised the rough. Talked with Colt Nost about that on Sirius Radio, and he brought up that they did raise the rough. But the one thing that I think really sets up well for low scoring, you look at the weather. I mean, it doesn't look like there's going to be much wind. It's extremely hot, and they've had some moisture. So if the greens are receptive, like we've seen the first 3 weeks, and there's no wind, I mean, even, when we don't have a lot of the top 20 players in the world, these guys are so freaking good. I mean, you watch the Korn Ferry Tour, you watch any professional golf, the level of play has just risen so much. And I think if these guys can confidently go at flag sticks, we're going to see some low numbers. So I think 20 under is a pretty fair line. I don't have conviction, on a bet either way there. But if you push me to say, okay, you have to make one of those choices, I think I go under 20.5.
Okay. All right. That's fair. A couple other lower price guys this week. Maverick McNeely, I really like, especially for DFS purposes when we'll get into DFS a little bit more. Peter Uihlein is a guy, I liked him earlier in the week. I've kind of fallen off it a little bit. I was really high on him a few weeks ago. He was 14th at Colonial, hasn't played a tour event since then, did play one Corn Ferry event. And your boy, Peter, Aaron Wise.
Yes.
You like Aaron Wise. Aaron Wise has not played well, but man, there's a ton of talent there. I kind of put Wise and McNeely in sort of the same group right there. Really strong, talented kids who came off great college careers and are just kind of still getting their footing on the PGA Tour a little bit. But Wise is the guy that can win on any given week. Do you think it could happen this week, or at least a strong finish up near the top?
Yeah, so now we're talking about guys that I absolutely love this week. I'm super bullish on Aaron Wise. 2019, Aaron Wise made the exact amount of birdies that Rory McIlroy made. He was up there with John Rahm, JT, Webb Simpson. I mean, the worst name on the list is like, I don't even know, like Brooks Koepka. Like, it was like literally the who's who of golf and Aaron Wise in terms of birdies made last year. Yes, what does that say? He didn't have the success that those guys did, so he's clearly making bogeys and double bogeys or worse more often. But at this course, I think you really just need to make it to birdies, and I think that sets up really well for Aaron Wise, who is a huge talent. I mean, he does everything well, has a huge game. I think he probably, has some big misses with the driver occasionally, which leads to those bigger scores. But if he can keep that tight this week, he has as much talent as pretty much anyone in the field. So I like Aaron Wise. You can say the same thing about McNeely, who is a very highly touted golfer with a lot of upside. He's played pretty decently to start. And I just like all these young guys. I mean, Matthew Wolfe is in that same category. You mentioned Victor Hovland early on. I think Victor Hovland's a great play towards the top, especially in DFS. But Matthew Wolfe is not getting the same respect. And Matthew Wolfe had just as good, if not better, of a collegiate career than Colin Morikawa, who's absolutely destroyed the PGA Tour so far. And big bomber types that are at long odds this week. So I'm on those guys, and Aaron Wise is probably my favorite.
All right. Well, let's get to some of the line movement so far this week. I did speak with Jeff Sherman, the VP of Risk Management for Superbook USA, just a couple of hours ago. He's at Golf Odds on Twitter. Follow him. He does a fantastic job. Really, I think the best in the business at the golf handicapping game. He told me the biggest bet so far that they've received, $1,000 on Tony Finau to win, which have moved his odds from 30-1 to 25-1, and $650 on Brendan Todd, moving him from 80-1 all the way down to 50-1, which I think is that's a tough number to bet on Brendan Todd, even after last week's really strong 3-round performance. Who is trending for you so far? What have you seen from the line movement, Peter?
Yeah, Finau is someone I wanted to bring up right away. He's probably my favorite of the top tier. If I had to bet someone, I'm showing pretty neutral value, and I'm showing negative value for almost all of the top end golfers. So I like Tony Finau quite a bit this week, and the line movement unfortunately has kind of made it a more negative EV bet. But for DFS, I think he's a phenomenal play. And if you do line shop, there are some books that haven't moved him as strongly, and certainly there could be some value. I mean, talk about a talented player, hits the ball a mile and can get going with a ton of birdies. So he's someone that I really like. I mentioned Matthew Wolfe earlier. I've seen a lot of line movement on him. Aaron Wise has had some line movement. So that's something that you can take advantage of for DFS. You see a line move, maybe you didn't get to the bet and you were thinking about it and you say, oh, I missed it. Well, those line moves are not reflected in the DFS pricing, which comes out on Mondays. So that's one of the biggest advantages that you can have if you're taking DFS golf seriously, is looking at the line movement and where the markets are on Wednesday night and comparing that to the pricing, which comes out on Monday. So whenever you see a big line move, take advantage of that in the DFS markets.
Some other moving lines, especially in the matchups, where I think you can definitely find some value if some guys you like are moving in the other direction. This is from Brian Mears, Action Network's own Brian Mears with Fantasy Labs. Bryson, the money is moving towards Bryson, a matchup against Webb. I think that's no surprise there, even with the plus money going towards Webb. I think that a lot of people see value in betting Bryson against Webb. Finau, we just talked about Finau over Bubba, moving towards Finau, which makes perfect sense. Hideki over Ricky Fowler. Again, it just makes sense. Ricky was our big fade. We talked about him on the podcast this week. Both of us just kind of off Ricky, new swing coach, just nothing really clicking for him right now. And I wonder if Ricky is only playing this event because of the Rocket Mortgage title sponsor, which is also one of his sponsors. You wonder if he'd be there in other circumstances. So I have a tough time betting on a guy who maybe his heart isn't completely into being there this week. And then a guy you mentioned who you like a lot, money moving towards Matthew Wolfe in a matchup against Hubbard this week, Mark Hubbard. Hubbard's played well in the last couple of weeks, but Matthew Wolfe is a guy with some serious offensive firepower. That's one that I look at it. Wolfe is either going to lose that or he's going to win that. Hubbard's going to do his thing, but Wolfe is either going to play really well and win it or play really badly and lose it. So want to get to our favorite matchups. Peter, is there one that you're looking at right now where you're saying, you know what? It's just the number's wrong. I really like it. I'm feeling this guy over that guy. Where are you looking right now for some value in a matchup?
Well, it was Matthew Wolfe, and I might have contributed to that line movement. Well, who knows? But there's a lot of action on Matthew Wolfe, and that price really has changed. So there's no longer value there. But I do see value in a couple matchups that are still there. My favorite one is Stallings over Stanley. Stallings is a guy who is pretty streaky, and when he gets going, he's a really talented player. Has revamped his body and had a really strong showing on Sunday last week. Kyle Stanley kind of had the opposite thing happen for him. So I like Scott Stallings over Stanley. The prices range a little bit. Make sure you're shopping for the best price. But Stallings, to me, is a pretty strong play in all formats, and that's one of my favorite matchups of the week.
Yeah, I usually like going with matchups that feature sort of lesser-known players. I feel like we can get an edge doing this in the week-in, week-out basis, and we know these guys as well as anybody. So I like digging a little bit deeper and finding those jewels down there. But this week, one of my favorite matchups is a matchup of two of the best players in the field. I said earlier that I am fading Tyrrell Hatton this week. I just don't think that he can keep up on the pace that he's been going as of recently. And a guy I really like, we really haven't talked about him yet, but Patrick Reed. He plays well on Donald Ross horses. He was T5 last year, coming off a 64 in the final round of the Travelers on Sunday. I just think Reed is trending in the right direction, and I think that Hatton is overvalued right now. So I like Reed in that matchup over Hatton. Are you with me on that, Peter?
We haven't agreed on everything. I think normally we're kind of in lockstep. This one,
agree with you
I
on
am
everything.
freaking. Yeah, we are completely on the same page with this one. I like Patrick Reed more than the market, and I like Hatton less than the market. So you see this matchup, I'm with it. The market's saying Hatton's a better play than Reed, and for me, it's clearly Reed over Hatton. And I think Patrick Reed's going to win some golf tournaments here, and we've talked about it at the Action Network. I think people in general are pretty biased against Patrick Reed. A lot of people don't like Patrick Reed, and that impacts his market pricing just a bit. And I think he's a higher caliber of golfer than Tyrrell Hatton, who's certainly coming on strong. I do think he's a really elite golfer, establishing himself kind of in that, lower end of the top tier. But Patrick Reed is firmly in that top tier for me. So I like that matchup quite a bit. And I think Patrick Reed should be more of a favorite than Tyrrell Hatton this week.
I would love to see the two of those guys in a final pairing on Sunday afternoon. Fireworks. Some fiery dudes in that pair. Actually, I'd like to see him playing a Ryder Cup on Sunday. We'll save it. We don't need it this week. Let's save it for a Ryder Cup. Hatton and Reed going head-to-head. That would be so much fun. Those are our locks, but you guys out there have some locks as well, and your guys' locks are pretty good this week. We asked on Twitter for your favorites in our segment, Betting for Dough. Thanks, Chad Millman, for the name on that one. And the first one that we got, Mr. Papa Giorgio. I love that. Come on, Mr. Papa Giorgio, the first guy we have in our Betting for Dough segment, giving us a lock straight out of Vegas. Wesley Bryan, top 20, this week. He played really well at the Travelers last week. A lot of people jumping on Wesley Bryan based on his ball striking numbers. He led the field in strokes gained approaching the green last week. Could be a good play. I'm still not quite all in. I mean, this is only a guy who's played a couple of starts since missing about a year and a half of time. So I think a lot of people are jumping in maybe a little too much too soon. But hey, Mr. Papa Giorgio likes it. I ain't going to tell him he's wrong. So there's one of them. Hank Osella. Hank Osella says, he's not necessarily, going in with a specific bet here, but there's value on Adam Hadwin. We talked about Hadwin earlier. I'm not in on Hadwin this week. I love Hadwin usually. Big Hadwin guy. I think on certain golf courses, I'm just not totally feeling it this week, but I'm very nervous that Hank and some others are going to make me pay dearly for not having that. Martin T, he's just got Kevin Na straight across the board. Another one. Man, I said it earlier. Hadwin and Na, very popular picks. Not for me, but for everybody else. You guys are going to be right. I'm going to be wrong. So just keep hammering Hadwin and Na. And then the last one we have, Clint Ward. Clint, I'm going to Venmo you some money because wherever you found this one, I need to jump in. Doc Redman, plus 120 for his round 1 3-ball against Zach Blair and Ben Martin. Peter, can we get in on that, please, with Clint?
That sounds like a pretty sweet bet to me. I don't know where that price is, but that sounds fantastic. And Doc Redman is getting a lot of love. Has really moved heavily. In the line movement section. I mean, he has gotten so much credit. I never thought we'd see Doc Redman here, but playing well, like you talked about in the podcast. It's an intersection of recent form and course history, so it makes sense. And the other guy I want to talk about is Wesley Bryan. I am rooting for him in a huge way. He is so good for the PGA Tour. Just an amazing. Hilarious guy. He was out at Tiger Jam a couple years ago, and Tiger was having some health issues and couldn't have been, a better host, and was just hilarious to be around. In terms of betting him, though, my heart is saying I want all in. I'm rooting for him, but I think you bring up some really good points. Be careful. He has not played that many events, and when we don't have data on players, which we had the break, so there's not as much, but a lot of PGA Tour starts is a much better indicator than just a couple. So I'm hesitant to pull the trigger, especially as more and more people pile on, which has moved his price. So I'm rooting for Wesley Bryan in a huge way, one of my favorite players on tour. But from a betting perspective, I'm probably fading him.
By the way, Wesley Bryan already 0-1 this week. They had a little 9-hole practice match today that was televised even by the PGA Tour and Golf Channel. Wesley Bryan and I believe it was Ricky Fowler losing to Bubba Watson and Harold Varner III. So if you're the kind of guy that likes to read into pro-ams, there are no pro-ams right now, but if you like reading into that, then hey, maybe you stay away from a couple of those guys, then you kind of move Bubba and Varner up just a little bit. My favorite lock this week, I haven't even mentioned this guy's name yet. I don't think a lot of people are going to be on him, especially in DFS where he was a late ad. Kurt Kitayama. Learn the name. The guy plays mostly on the European Tour, and he's a stud on the European Tour. 77th in the official world golf ranking. I saw one book, and I've never actually seen maybe you've seen it, Peter. I don't look at that many books, not as many as you do, but I saw odds for the Monday qualifier, a 2-spotter in Detroit this week. Kurt Kitayama was 5-1 to be medalist, and guess what? He was the medalist. He got into the field on Monday. He's obviously playing well. I've got Kurt Kitayama for a top 20 this week, and I might still get him for a top 10 and maybe even better. Any thoughts on Kurt Kitayama this week?
I mean, if you're going to talk about current form, I mean, qualifying, that's as good of a sign as you possibly can get. And he's a name that people who play European DFS or follow golf around the world definitely know. And I think the majority of people who just follow the PGA Tour don't know him. So there could be some value in that regard. And yeah, for DFS, he's dirt cheap. I mean, I think I would stay away from him in the betting markets, just given where he's priced. But in DFS, I mean, he is at the very, very bottom. And that is a really, really intriguing price tag for someone who's clearly playing great, just qualified. So I like taking the Monday qualifiers, and I think that makes a lot of sense.
Little inside info for you. I played with my good friend Matty Carroll earlier today. He's a pro. He plays overseas. Said he played Q School a couple of years ago with Kurt Kitayama. Said it was the most clinical 2 days he's ever seen anybody play. He said Kitayama could just drive it into a 2-yard wide fairway if he wanted to. So keep that in mind this week, and that helped to make up my mind about Kitayama. I want to get to the weather, Peter. You mentioned earlier, hot, dry, the kind of conditions that we like to play in, the kind of conditions we like to sit back on the couch and watch when we're watching all weekend. Those weather delays. Hey, look, it's nice when you got a red umbrella as your logo like the Travelers Championship does, and you can put up those umbrellas and get some marketing dollars out of it. But there will be no umbrellas this week. It doesn't look like, we hope, in Detroit. The hot weather, dry conditions, does this do anything for you? Does this help shape anything as far as the betting market is concerned?
We want to see windy conditions if you want to find an edge normally in betting or DFS. Sometimes there can be huge advantages in terms of when you tee off based on the wind, which is the biggest factor in terms of the actual scoring. Wind is the one element that can bring even the best players in the world to their knees. We see much worse scoring when the wind starts to gust and get really, up there, 20 miles an hour plus. Doesn't look like there's going to be much wind. It's hot. It's dry. It was an easy course last year. I get they brought up the rough, but it just seems to me like it's going to lead to a birdie fest. I mean, we saw it today. I mean, the flags were basically limp out there. So I think it's going to be low scoring because of the weather. And we've seen that so far. It's been obviously the weather delays in the weekend, but when they've had pristine weather, these guys have gone super low. So that's kind of my expectation for this week.
I would think so. Although if it rains out a little bit and softens up the golf course, might actually be lower scores than if it's hot and dry and maybe the course firms up. Donald Ross greens, when they get a little firm, get a little crusty, maybe it's tough to hold those greens. So that actually might be better as far as seeing scores that aren't so low. So I want to get into the DFS. We've talked about a lot of players so far and tangentially about DFS, but let's kind of get into DFS this week and guys that we're looking at. First of all, take us through. We're not going to bring up the Fantasy Labs model as we often do here on the Gimme, but why don't you just kind of tell us a little bit about, if people haven't looked at Fantasy Labs yet, what they're missing out on and what they might see there?
Yeah, something we're really proud of is the ability to build models and see a lot of data, about these PGA Tour golfers. And that's something I truly enjoy, looking at all the different stats. And on Fantasy Labs, you can look at all those stats. And if you're into playing a lot of lineups, you can make, up to 150 lineups in seconds. And the Fantasy Labs tools are great for DFS contests. They'll give you an edge over your opponents. And it's a great way to kind of analyze things from a different perspective. So I really love using the tools. I play a bunch of volume on DraftKings and on FanDuel, and I'm making my teams on Fantasy Labs. So it's really helpful, and we're really proud of the tools that we've built there.
I love everything about it, but I'm not putting my teams on there. I've told you before, making teams for me, it's like it's what calms me at night. Like some people do crossword puzzles, some people sit on the couch, do Sudoku, they play Words with Friends or Angry Birds on their phone. I make DFS lineups. This is what I do. It calms me down at night. I like it. It's fun. So I'm not using that tool. I'm using everything else though on Fantasy Labs. I want to go through the models just a little bit, even though we're not bringing up that screen, but just tell me a little bit about who's popping in the models, especially from that top tier. Let's start up at the top. Who's looking good in the models this week from the guys who are, in the upper price range, say the top 15 or so on the list as far as salary?
Yeah, so two guys really stand out to me, and one is Bryson DeChambeau. He is the most expensive, but like I mentioned off the top, the difference between his DraftKings price and Webb Simpson is much smaller than the betting price. So yes, you're getting good value on Bryson, who I think is a clear pass in terms of betting, especially from an outright at 6.5 to 1. But in DFS, I mean, hard to argue with how well he's played. And I think, like I said, he's easily the clear favorite in this field. So you get the best golfer, and if it does turn into a birdie fest and he's playing his B game or better, I mean, he's going to be top 10 at worst, I think. So, and if you get his B plus game, he's probably going to win. And if you get his A game, he's going to win by a lot. So I think Bryson is a clear top choice. Finau is the other guy that I really like. I'll let you talk about Reed, who would be my third choice in this top tier. But Finau missed the cut last week on the number. People will look at his DraftKings game log, see that missed cut. He barely missed, and I think he's going to win some more golf tournaments. We've been saying that for a long time, but this is a really good field for him to win in. He's one of the clear top golfers, and he drives it a mile, and he's going to have a lot of wedges, and I think he's capable of getting hot and making a lot of birdies. All
right, let's get to the mid-tier. A lot of guys in here, very popular this week. Brandt Snedeker, Adam Hadwin, Kevin Na, Eric Van Rooyen, Rafa Cabrera-Bello, Doc Redman, all guys we've talked about already on this show. That's who we like, but what about the models? Who do the models like this week? Who are they saying statistically should have the best week from this tier?
So that's one of the cool things about Fantasy Labs is you can build different models. So if you weight course history, which we only have 1 year, Doc Redman's going to skyrocket up the model rankings. So if you weight, depending on what you weight, if you weight recent form, Doc Redman's also going to be high. But if you weight more long-term statistics, you're going to get some different things. So for me in my model, EVR is actually standing out quite a bit. And I think he's a really solid play in this mid-range. I do think I'll have a lot of star and lower tier player, but
don't call them scrubs.
I don't want to call them scrubs. That's normally the DFS term, but yeah, I think in this tier, EVR stands out to me a lot, and I think you actually can fade a decent amount of these guys, especially in like the Millionaire Maker, because I do expect Kevin Na, Adam Hadwin, RCB, those guys to be pretty chalky. So I feel comfortable fading those guys in top heavy payouts, and I hope EVR flies a little bit under the radar because he's probably my favorite in this range. Harold Varner the third too, I want to throw out.
Okay, now moving down to the low tier. Is there anybody down there that the models are popping? And I especially want to ask this question because I've made a few lineups where I'm just stacking. I got stars all over the place, stars and mid-tier stars and other stars. And then I'm like, all right, I got 6,200 left in my DraftKings lineup. I got 61, 6,000 even. Is there anyone way down the list that you're looking at saying, you know what? And this is important. I think people tend to overlook these guys, but when you're making a lineup, and especially a lineup that could be top heavy, which might help this week, there can be some guys down at the bottom of the list that, hey, we can differentiate between guys who have no chance of making the cut and guys who could give us a top 20 finish and be really valuable in a lineup.
Yeah. So first off, kind of in this range, it's not dirt cheap, but Aaron Wise is someone that we talked about that I think really makes a lot of sense. In terms of the really cheap guys, there's a couple of players that I think you can start to look at. Some guys are popping a little bit more than others. Ryan Bream, I think, is an interesting one. No one's really heard of Ryan Bream, but his ball striking stats are significantly better than a lot of other guys kind of in the really, really low tier. Kitayama is someone that I'm really interested in. You brought him up. I know you got to be loading him into some DFS lineups. I think he makes a lot of sense. Ryan Blom's getting a little bit of love. Bill Haas, if you wait long-term stats, he's going to be up there. I don't know if I can buy Bill Haas, but he certainly has a much better pedigree than the majority of guys in this range. You have Bronson Burgoon, Roger Sloan, Zach Zucker. There's some intriguing names. Scott Harrington is a friend with Drew Stoltz, the Sleaze. So I have a soft spot for him, but yeah, it's a tricky range to have a lot of conviction at the very bottom. I think I want to go kind of in the mid sixes, low sevens more than I want to go down to the low 6K range.
Okay, so a few things there. If you're picking players down near the bottom, don't mix up your Ryan Bream from your Ryan Blom. Two totally different guys.
Yes.
Secondly, I'll give you two names that somehow you just went through 30 names at the bottom of the list and didn't have either of the two that are on my list from the bottom. Christopher Ventura at 6,400 on DraftKings. This kid was a stud player, also from Norway, buddies with Victor Hovland, went to Oklahoma State. This kid's a really good player, won twice on the Korn Ferry Tour last year, which is how he got his card, basically the same way that the other guys did, except the other guys got to the PGA Tour and won there. He went to the Korn Ferry, won there, got his card. So he's really talented. And then at 6,000, if you're going dirt cheap, I've got a couple lineups where I go, I want Reed and Im and Hovland, and I want this guy and that guy. I just want. And so, okay, well, I left myself with nothing at the bottom. Robbie Shelton, another young player who's really good in college at Alabama. Robbie Shelton, not a terrible play this week if you've got to go bargain basement down at 6,000, Peter.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I have not put him any of my DFS lineups, but you might be convincing me. Again, I would love to stay in like this, high 6K range where there's a ton of guys. I mentioned Wise. I mentioned Wolfe earlier. Harry Higgs, I think, is a really strong play. Ryan Armour played awesome last week.
Yes, he did.
Might not be the best course fit for him, but, you're getting into a much better tier of golfer, and that's the range where I see a lot of betting value too. So I like the high sixes, low sevens range on DraftKings.
One of these weeks, very soon, he's already done it on a lower scale, but at a bigger event, Harry Higgs is going to contend for a title on Sunday, and social media is going to blow up with everyone saying, that dude's my favorite golfer now. I've never heard of him, but he's a little portly. He's got the shirt unbuttoned to here. He's got some sideburns. He looks like he wants to go out and have a beer with everybody. I'm telling you, Harry Higgs is going to be maybe not a superstar player, but a superstar personality on the PGA Tour for a long time, and I cannot wait for this week. Rocket Mortgage Classic. Oh, we're less than 12 hours away, less than 10 hours away from the beginning of the opening round tomorrow. Final thoughts, Peter?
Yeah, agree with you on Higgs. Hope he can get up there. Wesley Bryan too. I love the personality on both those guys. And yeah, my final thoughts are make sure if you're betting to look and really dig through kind of the low end of the mid tier to the low tier. I think there's more value there than there is at the top. And of course, if you want to hedge yourself, you can get exposure to that top tier in DFS on DraftKings. So that's my approach this week. And hopefully we have a good one.
My final thoughts, bet everybody you can not lose if you do it that way. I'm just saying. I mean, it's one way to do it. I may be doing that as well. I've got a lot of irons in the fire this week. Can't wait for the Rocket Mortgage Classic to get underway. We've got so much good golf, fun stuff. Stick with us on the Action Network. The app is fantastic. You've got to log in there, log your picks, watch your friends' picks, track it in real time. And, of course, all of our content on the actionnetwork.com throughout the week. You have been watching The Gimme. Why? Because it's good.